And the usher of the Black Rod now making his way. This is the chief liaison, essentially, between the monarchy and the government. His name is Greg Peters, and it's a very symbolic role. It's actually really symbolic even if the king weren't here. At the start of any parliamentary session, there's a process whereby the usher of the Black Rod goes and gets all the members of parliament, and then also kind of gets things started in the Senate with the Speaker of the Senate. It is a very crucial role to Parliament writ large, but it is particularly crucial when the monarch is present, as is the case today. And
the role of the Black Rod actually goes back 600 years. I mean, this goes way back in the constitutional system, and it is quite a tradition. I mean, the Black Rod, the usher of the Black Rod, takes the Black Rod and then knocks on the doors of the Commons 3 times. And basically, when the Governor General is sitting, says that the Governor General desires to see you. Given that the King is in town today, he'll say that the King commands to see you. Those MPs will then go to the Senate and hear this speech from the throne. The Black Rod, by the way, the original Black Rod, was destroyed in the fire in Parliament, and then the UK gifted a new one to Canada a couple of years later. So that one, the new one, not that new, but the one that was replaced, has been in use ever since.
And you can see there the crowds that are lining up in anticipation of King Charles and Queen Camilla and their journey in that horse-drawn carriage across Wellington. You can see some members of the RCMP there as well. Let's throw it over to our colleague Judy Trin, who is in the middle of those crowds. Judy, tell me a bit about what the people who have gathered to see the King and Queen are telling you about why they're there.
Well, Vassy, you know, this is not the first time that the throne speech has been used to unify Canada in the face of forces that want to tear the country apart. In 1977, when Queen Elizabeth II was here, Canada was facing the domestic threat of Quebec separatism that wanted to separate from Canada. I can tell you that just a few minutes ago, we had protesters here waving a flag in support of Trump and against the monarchy. And this crowd that you see, which are numbering thousands strong, basically started chanting elbows up. So you see young children here and across the generations. Now, one of the very first people to gather here today was Joanne Bray and her husband, Wayne McDonald. They're with me now, and I wanted to get a sense, Joanne, about why you felt it was necessary to come out here more than nearly 2 hours before this procession even started.
Well, we tried to see the King yesterday at Lansdowne, and the crowds were big, and so we didn't succeed, but it was a beautiful day. So today we went out for a walk, and we decided why not try to get a good place to see the King. I think it's important, so we wanted to be here.
You were saying earlier that you didn't consider yourself a monarchist, but something about this moment has stirred these feelings of patriotism in you. What about it has stirred these emotions?
Well, I think we are at a moment where sometimes our history and our democracy are taken for granted a little bit, and so I think this is a good reminder of how important it is that we have a head of state, that we respect him, and that if he comes all the way here to deliver our speech from the throne, that's historical on its own. So I think it's exciting, and I wanted to be a part of history, and I think it's helpful to get the people mobilized as well and to appreciate our country again and remind ourselves of how wonderful a place it is.
Wayne, let me ask you a couple of questions. You know, this pomp and ceremony is for the people. Are you feeling patriotic?
I feel patriotic, and it's a long history.
Oh, they're coming. Wait. Okay, here it goes. All right. All right. That was a moment in which these people will always remember, as the King and Queen drove by in their landau, accompanied by the 21 horses of the RCMP. This crowd said, "This is my King. There goes my King." So this is important to point out, because this is King Charles coming to Canada on the invitation of Prime Minister Mark Carney to basically shore up support for a Canadian Canadian sovereignty. This is the King of Canada on the invite of the Prime Minister. And I should also point out to you that there are dual American Canadian citizens here. There are people from across various cultures, exemplifying the Canadian mosaic that makes this country what it is. Vassy and Omar, Prime Minister Carney has said there are three pillars of sovereignty which sets Canada apart from the U.S. The most distinct, perhaps most obvious, is the fact that we are a constitutional monarchy, but also it has to do with our Indigenous relations, this country's history with the First Nations, with the Métis and with the Inuit, as well as our acknowledgement of Quebec. And this is a moment in which those three pillars of Canadian sovereignty come together in history. Vassy and Omar.
It's also a moment, Omar, where it's actually happening. They're not delayed. We were told they were 15 minutes delayed. They've left. Yeah, they've made up some great time. They're making their way along the route from the Bank of Canada to the Senate, where the King will deliver the speech. There they are. This is our first glimpse now of the King and Queen. Let's listen in as they make their way through the crowd. And there's the scene outside the Senate. That is the building that houses the Senate, where King Charles and Queen Camilla are now making their way in that very historic landau along the route along Wellington Street to that building. Our Abigail Beeman is also in the middle of all that action. Abigail, I'll throw things over to you.
Hi, well, as you mentioned, the King and Queen just pulled up in that landau behind me. Also in that carriage is the Governor General and her party. The crowd here is a funny mix of getting extremely exciting and then going silent, just wanting to take everything in. You can hear them now cheering behind me. Moments before the Mounties on horses arrived, the Prime Minister arrived. That was an exciting moment for the crowd here. The Prime Minister was standing on the dais there as "O Canada" was played. He had sort of a... We're just going to listen into the crowd here.
completes the 21 gun salute. I think that was
I think we heard
21.
it.
Yeah. And the inspection of the Guard of Honor, 100% Guard of Honor from the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment. You could see King Charles on a couple of instances there stop for a moment to speak to the members of the Guard of Honor that he was, the term is formally inspecting. And now he will make his way eventually, after the full inspection is complete, into the Senate, which is where he'll deliver the speech.
And His Majesty, of course, wearing a customary medal array and an Order of Canada around his neck as he continues to
meet with some members of the band, trying to make it if we can hear what he's saying, but it's
I'm
hard.
listening too. So many times with these royal visits, they actually cut the boom mic, so you can't hear what the royals are saying. But I'm also trying to listen to see what.
The last one we did was 2021.
And I think I hear people in the crowd chanting "God Save the King," if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right, yeah. Quite a sizable crowd has definitely gathered through the course of the morning, watching the King make his way into the building that houses the Red Chamber. And here he goes to sort of present himself to the crowd. King Charles, Queen Camilla. I think it's the Governor General and her husband, Whit Fraser, just
right.
behind him, making their way inside now, greeted by another rousing rendition of O Canada as the King stood to kind of present himself to the crowd, adorned like the Prime Minister in the medal of the Order of Canada around his neck.
He has now made his way through the doors of the Senate chamber. And we're just trying to make out who he's greeting and shaking hands with right now. CTV's Abigail Beeman is across the street. This is the Chief of the Defense Staff coming up here, Jenny Carignan. CTV's Abigail Beeman is standing by. Just walk us through that moment in history, Abigail, that we just all saw and witnessed together.
That was a really good way to put it, a moment
Abigail?
in history. And I think I'll reference again how the crowd reacted. How the crowd reacted when both the Prime Minister and the King arrived. So we saw the King and Queen, as well as the Governor General and her spouse, arrive in that open carriage and get out. There were two O Canadas played first when the Prime Minister arrived. I'm not sure if you want to listen again. Yeah, I'll throw it back to you, Vassy and Omar.
Yeah, well, we're going to thanks, Abigail. We'll take a listen in because the river dance drummers are about to perform inside the foyer of the Senate for King Charles.
Enjoy your visit. Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for coming. Hey. Hey, how you doing there? Good to see you.
King, the Queen, the Prime Minister, the Governor General, all thanking the river dance drummers for their performance. You can see the gallery even in the foyer lined with people, with onlookers who are hoping to catch a glimpse of the King and the Queen. They will now kind of disappear in a few moments from public view, and when they re-emerge, they will be back inside the Senate, where ultimately the King is set to deliver the speech from the throne. It's probably a good place to point out that there are a number of Indigenous leaders that the king met with yesterday, many of whom have conveyed to us they are hoping that there is significant reference in this throne speech to the treaty relationship between Crown and Indigenous people, the Crown rather, and Indigenous people in this country. I do expect there will be some of that in the speech, but it's also a key part of what you have seen so far in the ceremony that's leading up to the speech. Lots of Indigenous participation through, for example, what we just witnessed with the river dance drummers. There will be more after the ceremony as well. And then, of course, the Governor General herself, the first Indigenous person to hold the title of Governor General in our history. And
acknowledging that colonial legacy, a part of this country's journey of reconciliation. We were wondering who some of those members of the entrance party were, Vassy, when the royal couple arrived inside the Senate together with the Governor General and her husband, Whit Fraser. And we know that the Speaker of the Senate was there, the spouse of the Speaker of the Senate, the Chief of the Defense Staff, as we mentioned, Jenny Carignan, and the Commissioner of the RCMP, Commissioner Michael Duet. Let's get to CTV's royal commentator, Afia Hagan, who joins us now from London. And as we get ready for this throne speech to get underway, Afia, in about a half an hour's time, you mentioned the last time we chatted about this concept of soft diplomacy, the fact that the king and his role is not an inherently political role, it's an apolitical role. But we have seen examples from him, as we're seeing now, and also with the Queen, of them exerting their power and their influence in certain cases historically. Can you talk a little bit about that and the significance of that part of their role?
Yes, absolutely. You know, the king is supposed to, or the monarch rather, is supposed to remain apolitical at all times. Queen Elizabeth II, you know, managed to do that pretty much through her time as the monarch. But when it came to apartheid, particularly, something that she felt that she had to sort of exert the power of soft diplomacy, and that, you know, when it came to places that she would visit, when it came to people that she would speak to, you know, it was all about subtly as you can, you know, place her support for the South African Indigenous people against apartheid at that time, whilst also not really saying anything at all. It's a very difficult sort of tightrope that you have to toe, where you are the head of state, where you are supposed to set yourself apart from the political fray. But Queen Elizabeth II was a vocal opponent of apartheid in South Africa. You know, it was something that she felt she had to do. She refused to visit the country at the time of racial segregation. She just said that she wasn't going to go there. And that was her way of flexing that power of soft diplomacy, of letting that play out. This is something that we are seeing similarly here with King Charles III. It's not necessarily not visiting a country, but for him, you know, as a sovereign and as the monarch of Canada and of the United Kingdom, those are the countries that he has to have their back, essentially, for want of putting it a better way, in the face of an aggressor, whoever that aggressor may be. We've also seen him on the world stage with President Zelensky. You know, he's shown his support for Ukraine over the duration of the war the past 3 years, whether that's, you know, wearing a yellow tie or having a Ukrainian flag or having colors of flowers in the colors of the Ukrainian flag at events he's been at. You know, it's these kind of subtle ways that he has shown his political leanings, perhaps where he stands on things, and flexing that power of soft diplomacy. But you've got to think to yourself, it comes to a point where your head of state, your monarch, can't afford to stay out of the fray. And I think that's where we are now, is that King Charles III knows that as the head of state of Canada, he has to perhaps show us his political leanings, show us that he has Canada's back. He has to do that because he is the head of state. And so that's why I said earlier, he's as apolitical as he can afford to be, but he also can't afford to be completely ignorant. He can't afford to sit back on his laurels and let the geopolitical situation play out in the way that it is. He has to get involved. He has to be in the fray, and that's what we're seeing here.
So So a chance for the monarchy to prove or show its own relevance in the context of this time. Is there any opportunity for King Charles to be the so-called Trump whisperer? I mean, it appears publicly that Donald Trump is somebody who respects the king.
Donald Trump is someone who loves the idea of the British royal family. He's a huge fan of Queen Elizabeth II. He's a huge fan of King Charles III. Remember, Melania Trump and King Charles III are pen pals. Love to know what they've been chatting about recently. But absolutely, King Charles III and Prince William both are the Trump whisperers. They absolutely have his ear. And he is, someone that they can influence. Donald Trump absolutely respects the king, respects Prince William. And so we'll listen to what they have to say. The Trump administration, along with Donald Trump himself, will be watching what's happening today very, very closely. I'm sure they're watching our coverage, actually. And they will want to know how this plays out. They'll want to hear what King Charles says in his speech. So yes, they can be the Trump whisperers, absolutely. They can be the ones to sort of talk him down, to offer him something else. We've heard whispers of perhaps the United States being an associate member of the Commonwealth, and Donald Trump, loved that idea. He, on his Truth Social, his platform said, that sounds good to me. So maybe that's something that can be leveled in exchange for the Americans backing down on this ludicrous idea of Canada being the 51st state. Let's not forget we have that second state visit coming up as well. Unprecedented. Many presidents have ever had a second state visit. And that state visit's not just going to be about Buckingham Palace and pomp and pageantry. It's about Balmoral. Balmoral's the inner circle. For Donald Trump to feel like he's in the inner circle with King Charles III, that's worth more than its weight in gold. And that's the power of soft diplomacy that can change things.
All right, I know you're standing by. This is a live look from inside the Senate chamber. And the two thrones that you just saw there a couple of seconds ago, that's the first time that those thrones will be used by a reigning monarch, by King Charles and the Queen, in about a half an hour's time when that throne speech gets underway. That throne is made out of Canadian walnut and also has a piece, by the way, from a forest just behind Windsor Castle. That's a piece of wood that the British royal family donated to Canada. And so there is that part of the links to the monarchy that are reflected in the two thrones that you're seeing there right now.
Can also see, this is our first glimpse inside the room of who has actually assembled, because we know beyond senators, and we can see a number of them in their seats, there are a variety of dignitaries. So on the left hand of your screen, I can see kind of out of the corner of my eye, former governors general. I saw both David Johnston, Governor General David Johnston, as well as Governor General Adrienne Clarkson. Behind them, a number of Indigenous leaders. I believe I saw Nat and Obed among them. I know there are former prime ministers here, for example, Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau. Been a long time since they've all been in the same room. I think I might see some of them to the right hand of the screen. Oh, I believe Mr. Harper is sitting right next to Mr. Trudeau. I think I just saw that on the right hand screen before the camera panned up. So we'll keep our eye on who else we can see assembled. But this also reflects like the uniqueness of the moment. I can't remember the last time a variety of governors general, but also former prime ministers were together to witness the delivery of the throne
And I
speech.
think just opposite the thrones, we saw the justices of the Supreme Court of Canada seated there as well.
Yeah, I think they're actually supposed to meet in person with the king as well at some point, maybe even prior to the start of the speech at some moment. In the initial itinerary, at least, they had laid that out. The Supreme Court justices, that is.
So again, the speech from the throne expected to get underway in about a half an hour's time. We were hearing that things were running a little bit late. Again, they seem to have picked up time. But it seems like things are back on schedule now, expected to start at about 11 o'clock. And then at that point, it should last about 15 or 20 minutes. And, just going back to Scott Reed was telling you, Vassy, that the language in this throne speech is going to be particularly significant given the line that the king has to walk here. Obviously has to find a way to assert Canada's independence, sovereignty from the United States, but also can't expressly get political, because that's just not what the job is.
Yeah, Corey made a good point. Like, there is a certain level of anticipation around how big of a deal this is and how big of a message around our sovereignty might be delivered. But I think also, like, the cautionary note is, I don't see the desire for further antagonism anywhere around us right now. So I would be shocked to see if that came via the king. So very interested to see the way in which they're able to weave that together. You're looking just inside the Senate chamber where that throne speech, as Omar mentioned, will be delivered in about half an hour's time. A number of senators have assembled. MPs will also join them after after they are essentially gathered from the House of Commons and brought over. Our royal commentator, Richard Berthelsen, is following along with us as this all unfolds. Richard, I wanted to get your take on the crowds and the reception for the king so far, because just sitting, half a block away from it, it's been pretty cool to witness. What has been going through your head as you see the really quite warm reception for the king and queen?
Well, yeah, it's been a great reception. Lots of people yelling out, "God Save the King," people really enjoying hearing the anthems being played, particularly "O Canada." So it's a great feeling in the streets of Ottawa as this really beautiful spectacle goes by with our RCMP musical ride and the coach and the armed forces all in their best dressed uniforms. Of course, this was the first occasion we've seen where the king has been greeted officially by a full guard of honor of the Canadian Forces since he became our sovereign. And of course, the king today is wearing his sovereign's insignia of the Order of Canada around the neck. I think some people had hoped the king might wear Canadian Forces uniform, but he probably couldn't choose between the Navy, Army, and Air Force, so he tactfully opted for the suit. But the thing I was really struck by, too, in the opening is that as soon as he entered the building there, the temporary headquarters of the Senate, he was greeted by drummers, a drum circle. And what was striking to me is right under the portrait of Queen Victoria. And when you think so many treaties in this country were signed in the name of and on behalf of Queen Victoria in her very, very long reign, obviously things that we're dealing with the consequences of today, I thought the symbolism of that with the monarch, the current monarch, the one whose name the treaties were done, and the First Nations right below it was very striking. And I think it again really speaks to our history and who we are as a people and some of the issues we're dealing with. I see now the procession has formally started into the Senate.
Yes, we've got another glimpse of the king and queen, the governor general. I believe the prime minister is also, and his wife alongside them. This is sort of the procession that will move the king and queen into the chamber, where the king will ultimately deliver that speech. There's still a bunch of stuff that has to happen in the interim. As far as the speech goes, as we kind of set the table for what to expect, Richard, lots of back and forth about how far essentially he would go when it comes to the threat that we face as a country from the United States, and from, in particular, this president of the United States. What are your expectations for that?
I expect the speech will be a dignified and a very, subtle reminder of some of those things. I think it will obviously address the challenges we're having. It's not going to address them directly head on. It's not that kind of occasion. And of course, he'll do so in a way that befits his role and what the Canadian government wants him to say.
We'll take a listen in now.
Pray be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Usher of the Black Rod, We will proceed to the House of Commons and acquaint that House that it is the pleasure of His Majesty the King that they attend him immediately in the Senate chamber. Huissier du bâton noir, rendez-vous à la Chambre des communes et informez-la que c'est le plaisir de Sa Majesté le Roi que les communes se rendent immédiatement auprès de lui dans la salle du Sénat.
Oh, okay. They've moved over on this side, but.
The king is now greeting the various justices of the Supreme Court. We just heard from 18-year-old Morgan Grace, a left-handed Métis fiddler from Manitoba, who performed for quite the crowd. The usher of the Black Rod has also just departed to go over to the House of Commons to gather members of Parliament who will then make their way back to the Senate. And when everyone has assembled, that's when the throne speech gets underway.
I just want to point out that the personalities that were in that Senate chamber. This is a live look at the House of Commons now, where, as you mentioned, the usher of the Black Rod will go and basically say that the king commands to see you in advance of his throne speech, and then
they're ready.
They're waiting for that command. And then from here, the MPs will go to the Senate. The king speaking to Adrienne Clarkson right now, former Governor General, and her husband, John Ralston Saul. And beside them, of course, Michael Jean, another former Governor General, and David Johnston as well. And I believe Sharon Johnston, his wife, is next to him as well as part of that line. But the grouping of people is fascinating. I mean, to see former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau together, in addition to Kim Campbell and then Neela Mulrooney, the wife of the late Brian Mulrooney, you don't typically see this type of grouping of people and personalities, but it just goes to show that this is a moment in time where flag comes before politics. Canada comes before politics. And you see many of these people sitting side by side.
Yeah, and oftentimes you might see governors general because they're apolitical in nature. And it is protocol to invite former prime ministers to the throne speech, but they don't usually attend, right? Because it's normally a highly politically charged moment. There's still politics involved in everything that's going to happen today. It is about the agenda of the government. But beyond that, it is beyond all of, beyond that, it is also about this moment that we're witnessing. The king there speaking to various members of the Senate. You mentioned some of the former prime ministers in attendance. There's a bunch of current premiers there. The premiers of New Brunswick, Manitoba, PEI, Newfoundland, and Yukon are all in attendance for this, as well as a host of lieutenant governors from each of the provinces, as well as who, of course, represent the monarchy in those provinces.
His Majesty now speaking with various members of the Supreme Court of Canada. Justice Mahmoud Jamal there to the right of your screen, and also speaking with the Chief Justice, Richard Wagner. And now continuing down the line.
Yeah, that's Senator Peter Harder there, who spent a long time representing the government in the Senate. The Senate's such a unique place at the moment because some people are independent, some people represent the government, some people represent the opposition. It's a bit of a mishmash. Kathleen Monk, Scott Reed, and Corey Tonight are also listening in to all of this. Scott, what strikes you so far about the group of people who have assembled, the kind of unique nature of all those former prime ministers lined up in the front row?
Yeah, this was one of the things that I always loved about these events when I was working in Ottawa, was you would get this kind of mashup of political traditions, people who'd served as prime minister in the past, and there's an outer ring as well that we're not seeing with, former staffers and journalists and other folks. So it sort of brings people together. And you can bet that today in particular, with the arrival of the king, because it is such a rare occurrence and given our circumstances, people were eager to be there. So I don't think anybody was turning down an invitation.
Yeah, very much the case. Corey, your thoughts on your old boss being among the attendees for this government's throne speech?
Well, he's a pretty strong royalist and supporter of the royal family, so I'm not surprised that he's there with enthusiasm. But I think Scott's right. These are rare moments, but I think they're very positive moments, and I think they speak well of the country and of all the people assembled. There are institutions and things that should bring our country closer together. And while the monarchy is not everybody's cup of tea, it is a part of our history, and it's an important part. And we should pay homage to that and gather together at moments like this. It's once in 50 years.
And we will listen in right now as the usher of the Black Rod goes into the House to gather those MPs.
A message from His Majesty, the King of Canada. Un message de Sa Majesté, le Roi du Canada. The King of Canada. Un message de Sa Majesté, le Roi du Canada.
Mr. Speaker, a message from His Majesty the King. Monsieur le Président, un message de Sa Majesté.
From His Majesty the King.
Admit the messenger. Faites entrer le messager.
Admit the messenger.
Mr. Speaker, it is the pleasure of His Majesty, the King of Canada, that this honorable House attend him immediately in the chamber of the Senate. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker,
c'est le plaisir
it's a pleasure
de Sa Majesté,
of
le
His
Roi du
Majesty
Canada,
the King of
que
Canada
cette honorable chambre
that this
se rende immédiatement
distinguished
auprès
room
de lui dans
come
la
and meet
chambre
him
du Sénat.
in the Senate room.
Everyone remembers it. It seems to have worked. Good. That's good. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Congratulations. Fortunately, you didn't help me on it.
Okay, so the MPs are on their way. They have been collected by the usher of the Black Rod. You could see them from all different political parties making their way there out of the chamber of the House of Commons. They've got about a 2.5 block walk to make it over to the Senate chamber, which is now housed in the old train station in downtown Ottawa. King Charles, in the meantime, is making good use of his time in that chamber and greeting all the various people who have assembled. He's back there talking to, I think it's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Richard Wagner. Mila Mulrooney standing just behind him. Just moments ago, the king was greeting all the former prime ministers who, and you can see Justin Trudeau's mother next to him now,
Margaret.
actively engaged in conversation with former Prime Minister Stephen Harper.
To be a fly on the wall.
Yeah, I'll be a lip reader, I'll take that, yeah.
And former Prime Minister Kim Campbell as well in the background. But again, just a fascinating assembly of people of all political stripes gathered there in the Senate chamber. You just saw moments ago the usher of the Black Rod basically summoning MPs from the House of Commons on behalf of His Majesty King Charles. And from there, the MPs will make their way down Wellington Street to the Senate chamber. It really isn't that far at all. And if this was all contained in the same building as it once was in Centre Block, the process would be far more efficient. But we know Centre Block is going through a process of renovation right now. And so the Senate chamber has been moved to the old Ottawa train station, where you see this crowd currently gathered.
So we're not too far away now from the delivery of the speech from the throne. We're anticipating, as the king there talks to, I think it's former Governor General David Johnston there, that it will last anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. The speech is normally, outside of this third time, not delivered by the monarch, but by the monarch's representative here in Canada, the Governor General. That's the normal course of action. It opens a brand new session of Parliament. In this case, it's the 45th session of Parliament, the 40th Speaker elected yesterday by members of Parliament who have come back for the first time in 5 months. The King's delivery of this speech will be the first time in 48 years that a monarch has done so. Again, anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. The goal, Omar, because I gotta tell you, most of the time throne speeches don't draw a huge audience. They will today, it will today. But the goal for the government, it serves a purpose as well. It's to outline, okay, here is our agenda. If you have a majority government, you know it's a 4-year agenda. We don't know that to be the case because they're 3 seats shy of a majority. The Liberals have formed a minority government. And so it's in more broad strokes, kind of laying the land for what their agenda will look like. And we have strong indications already through even the speech yesterday delivered in the House of Commons by the Prime Minister of what we will likely hear, all about kind of building our economy against the backdrop of those very serious threats from the U.S. vis-a-vis tariffs or even references to us as the 51st state.
And throne speeches are significant because you can't really conduct an official business of Parliament until it's set out. And there is a relatively short initial window, right? We know that it's about 4 weeks before MPs break for the summer, essentially. Mark Carney has already signaled that he has an ambitious agenda ahead, that he wants to remove provincial trade barriers by July 1st, which of course is Canada Day. We know that the G7 summit is coming up in Kananaskis at the middle of June. We know that Donald Trump, which is a big reason the king is here today, will be at that summit, his first visit to Canada since he was elected. And so there's a lot to do in those 4 weeks, and we will be hearing a little bit about that in that throne speech coming up, again, expected to last about 20 to 25 minutes. But as we've been saying repeatedly through the morning, the king here will have to walk a line because throne speeches are the government's message, so Mark Carney's message. But the fact that these words are coming out of the sovereign's mouth, of King Charles's mouth today, is significant. There's no way that the palace would not have had to sign off on every word that the king is speaking. And so on one hand, he will have to find a way to affirm Canada's identity as an independent country in the face of Donald Trump's annexation threats. And what will be interesting to see, though, Vassy, is to see to what extent does he do that? How pointed does he get vis-a-vis Donald Trump? There has been a lot of suggestions, as you've been talking about, that that now is not the time perhaps to antagonize the U.S. president. But it is clear, as the Prime Minister has pointed out repeatedly through the campaign and also once he was sworn in, that the fundamental relationship between Canada and the United States has been changed, and that the course of action must be adjusted accordingly.
Yeah, you've got the Prime Minister here deep in conversation with King Charles. Kind of a neat story, if I could square the circle of the Prime Minister Donald Trump and the monarchy. So one of the first instances in which our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, met Donald Trump was at a gathering with the Queen, with King Charles's mom. And Donald Trump, as the story has been relayed to me, stood up kind of before something formal that the Queen does to end dinner, which is like a very specific cheers or toast that she gives. And Mark Carney is the one who told Donald Trump, took him aside and said, "You can't do this. You can't leave in this moment. This is the way it works." And I'm told that that was kind of one of the instances in which they kind of got to know each other socially, and kind of a neat little anecdote that brings together all the various themes from today.
And there was a royal reference during Mark Carney's speech to the to Washington in the Oval Office, right? Mark Carney said some things are just not for sale. Canada is not for sale, just like Buckingham Palace is not for sale. Telling that when he met with Donald Trump a little while ago. But again, His Majesty the King and the Prime Minister Mark Carney there in the Senate chamber, waiting for, at this moment, the arrival of the MPs who have just been summoned in the House of Commons and are expected to make their way to the Senate chamber momentarily. And those buses have arrived, and these are the first MPs who are now emerging from their vehicles and
I
from
thought
their
they had
buses.
to walk. They're getting bussed over.
And it's really not that far. It's a beautiful
day.
But obviously things are running. It's like clockwork, these events. And the throne speech was supposed to start at 11 o'clock Eastern. It has now hit that time. So things appear to be imminent as these MPs walk into the Senate chamber right now, awaiting the speech from the throne, which is only the third time that this will be happening since Canada's Confederation in 1867. We know the first time was in 1957 when the Queen delivered the throne speech. It happened then 20 years later in 1977, and now in 2025 when the King delivers the throne speech.
And once the MPs actually enter the chamber, it's not going to be too much longer thereafter before the King will begin the throne speech. Once again, anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. You're going to hear him, as the Governor General will deliver it, speak as if it were his government, right? My government will do X, Y, and Z. He is speaking in the voice of the federal government, of the Prime Minister more specifically, in laying out what they intend their agenda to be. There's the leader of the Conservative Party, the official opposition in the House, Andrew Scheer. I was going to say all parties are well represented in this endeavor today, and even through the sort of dignitaries that have gathered, like former prime ministers, all the different parties are represented there as well.
And we'd just like to take a quick moment to welcome our viewers from Atlantic Canada who are now joining on CTV main network as we watch these live images in Ottawa of MPs from all political stripes entering the Senate chamber for really what is a fascinating moment in this country's history. The speech from the throne expected to get underway momentarily.
Our Mike Locouture is actually inside where those MPs are entering right now. Mike, I'll send it over to you. Tell us a bit about what you're seeing.
Yeah, so the shot that you're seeing now, Vassy, is the MPs who were in the House of Commons at the time that the Usher of the Black Rod went and knocked on the door. So they came over, I believe, by these minibuses. Now, if you continue to sort of see here for a moment, I'll get Brian to sort of pan down the row. Earlier, you had a number of MPs, dozens of them, who had come in and lined up. And not to make this too much of a moment of levity, but they were all being herded here by members of staff from the Senate. I think it would have been better if they had one of those yellow ropes like you see at a daycare, because trying to make sure that they all stood in line and stayed here and made sure that they were actually staying in line. A couple of them, and I don't want to call them out by name, looked like they were trying to sneak to the front to get a better view. But anyways, those are MPs who will do what they want, but we see people here like François-Philippe Champagne, Michael Barrett, Yasser Naqvi, everybody from different parties. And now we are seeing the Usher of the Black Rod come through. So I'm probably going to have to send it back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. And we've got an inside look there at what is happening in the foyer of the House of Commons as members of Parliament, Mike mentioned, lined up. You can see a number of ministers among them as well as the procession makes its way back into the chamber of the Senate, where a number of senators have gathered, former prime ministers, former governors general, and that is where they're all going right now, is where the speech from the throne will be delivered.
And we saw yesterday, Vassy, what a special moment this was, not only for the people who are going to be able to, rub shoulders with their majesties, but also people who are here to absorb everything that's happening outside. People have been lining up just to get a sense of the excitement and of the jubilation of the day. You can see there the usher of the Black Rod entering the Senate chamber. And special, too, for somebody who, is not there. I was speaking yesterday with Phil White. He is the man who came up with the thrones or designed the thrones that the king will be using for the throne speech. And he's now retired. He retired in 2021. But he said he would be watching this moment extremely closely because this is the first time a reigning monarch will be using the thrones that are being used today. Let's just take a moment to listen in.